The bell above the diner door chimed at 2 in the morning. He was just a guy in a damp tailored coat nursing black coffee, trying to wash the metallic taste of a rough night out of his mouth. Then, the exhausted waitress leaned over to refill his mug. She paused. Her eyes dropped to his hand, to the heavy, scarred gold band on his right index finger. "Sir," she muttered, deadpan, "my mother has a ring exactly like yours." The coffee kept pouring. He didn't move. He just stopped breathing. The diner smelled of burnt sugar, industrial bleach, and old grease. It was a scent Gabriel Costa usually avoided. But tonight, it was the only place open on a stretch of highway that didn't ask questions. He sat in a cracked vinyl booth near the back, facing the door. Habit. Even when his bones ached with a deep, marrow-deep exhaustion, he sat where he could see everyone. Tonight, everyone consisted of a sleeping truck driver in the corner and a waitress who looked like she was running on fumes and sheer spite. Gabriel stared at the black surface of his coffee. He was 34, but the last 48 hours had aged him a decade. There was a faint crescent of dried blood under his left thumbnail. He caught sight of it, frowned, and quietly scraped it away with a napkin. The world he ran required order. It required cleanliness. But the transition from the violence of the docks to the fluorescent hum of a roadside diner was always jarring. He didn't want a drink. He wanted quiet. Across the room, Chloe Mercer shifted her weight off her left foot. Her orthopedic shoes gave a pathetic squeak against the linoleum. She was 25, but the harsh overhead lights and the double shifts drew sharp, cynical lines around her mouth. She didn't care about the guy in the expensive wool coat sitting in her section. Rich guys in cheap diners at 2 in the morning were either lost, drunk, or hiding. She didn't get paid enough to care which one he was. She just wanted to wipe down the counters, flip the open sign to closed, and go home to see if her mother had remembered to eat. Chloe grabbed the glass coffee pot off the burner. The handle was warm, familiar. She walked over to Gabriel's booth, her face set in a practiced mask of polite apathy. "Warm you up?" she asked. Her voice was slightly raspy, worn down by hours of taking orders from people who barely looked at her. Gabriel didn't look up. He just nudged the thick ceramic mug toward the edge of the table. "Please." Chloe tipped the pot. The dark liquid streamed into the cup. As she poured, her gaze drifted downward. He had large hands, knuckles slightly swollen, bruised. But it was the ring on his right index finger that caught her attention. It wasn't a standard piece of jewelry. It was a heavy, crude block of dull gold, stamped with a highly unusual crest. A pair of scales, heavily unbalanced, with a jagged fracture running straight through the metal. It looked ancient. It looked like a mistake someone had purposefully made. Chloe's brain, fogged by exhaustion, bypassed her usual filter. "Sir," she said, her tone flat, conversational, "my mother has a ring exactly like yours." Gabriel froze. He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. His entire body simply went completely, unnaturally still. The rhythm of his breathing stopped. His eyes, dark and flat as river stones, finally lifted from the table and locked onto her face. Chloe didn't immediately notice the shift in him. She was watching the cup. The coffee reached the brim. "Whoa," she muttered, pulling the pot back, just as a few drops spilled over the rim and hit the table. "Sorry about that. Long night." Gabriel stared at her. His voice, when it came, was dangerously soft. It was a voice used to giving orders in rooms where people didn't speak out of turn. "What did you say?" Chloe blinked, stepping back, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between them. The air in the booth felt suddenly thinner. I said I'm sorry. I'll get a rag to wipe that up. Before that. Gabriel's hand flattened on the table. The gold ring caught the harsh light. What did you say about this ring? It wasn't a question. It was a command. Chloe frowned, her defensive walls snapping into place. She dealt with weirdos all the time, but the sudden cold intensity radiating off this man made the hairs on her arms stand up. Nothing. Just a stupid observation. My mom has a ring with that same weird broken scale thing on it. Kept it in a cigar box since I was a kid. Forget I mentioned it. She turned to walk away. Gabriel's hand shot out. He didn't grab her wrist. He knew better than to make a scene. But his fingers clamped around the edge of the table with enough force that his knuckles turned white. Wait, Gabriel said. He forced his muscles to relax. He manufactured a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sorry, it's a custom piece, a family heirloom. I didn't think there were any others. Chloe studied him. She didn't buy the smile for a second. Well, I guess your jeweler made two. Have a good night, sir. She walked away, her spine stiff, disappearing behind the counter into the kitchen. Gabriel sat alone in the booth. The silence in his head was deafening. There were no other rings. There were only 3 ever made. One was on his finger. One was buried with his father. And the third belonged to the man who had orchestrated the car bomb that killed Gabriel's older brother 12 years ago. The man who had vanished like smoke. Gabriel reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and laid it neatly over the spilled coffee. He slid out of the booth, the leather squeaking against his coat. He paused at the counter, his eyes scanning the space behind the register. Taped to the wall next to the schedule was a list of employees. Shift 2. Chloe M. Gabriel walked out into the damp night air. The cold hit his face, but he barely felt it. The past, which he had spent a decade trying to hunt down and butcher, had just poured him a cup of coffee. The engine of the black SUV purred with a low, menacing idle in the alley across from the diner. Gabriel sat in the passenger seat. The window rolled down just enough to let the sharp scent of incoming rain filter through. Behind the wheel sat Dean. Dean was built like a cinder block and had the temperament of a bored librarian until someone crossed him. He watched the street, tapping his thumbs against the leather steering wheel. You're telling me, Dean said, his voice a low gravel rumble, that out of every late-night greasy spoon in this miserable state, you walked into the one where a waitress knows about the scale. She didn't just know about it, Gabriel corrected, staring out the window. He was watching the diner's back door. She said her mother has it. Dean stopped tapping. He turned his head slowly. Thomas Vance's ring. Gabriel didn't reply. He didn't need to. Thomas Vance was a ghost story in their syndicate. He was the insider, the trusted lieutenant who had sold out Gabriel's family to a rival outfit, rigged the explosives, and disappeared before the flames even died down. Gabriel had spent his early 20s turning the city upside down, tearing through Vance's associates, his safe houses, his bank accounts. Nothing. The man had evaporated. If Vance is her father, Dean started, doing the math. She said her mother had it, Gabriel interrupted. He rubbed his eyes, the fatigue finally catching up to him, settling deep in his temples. Vance didn't have a wife. He didn't have kids. We tore his life apart, Dean. We knew everything about him. There was no woman. There was no daughter. People hide things, especially guys who know they're going to turn rat. Dean shifted the car into gear. You want me to bring her in? No, Gabriel's answer was sharp, immediate. Dean raised an eyebrow. Gabe, if she's connected to Vance, I said no. You don't grab civilians off the street because of a passing comment. She didn't recognize me. She didn't know what the ring meant. If she knew who I was, she would have poisoned the coffee or run out the back door. She was just making conversation. Gabriel looked at his own hand, twisting the heavy gold band. I want you to dig. Her name is Chloe M. She works the graveyard shift at the Starlight Diner on Route 9. Find out her last name. Find out where she lives. And find out everything you can about her mother. And if the mother is Vance's widow? Gabriel's eyes hardened, the cynical, cold pragmatism returning. Then we find out where she's keeping his corpse, or where he's hiding. Across town, Chloe was dealing with a different kind of ghost. She turned the key in the deadbolt of her apartment. The door stuck, requiring a harsh shove with her shoulder to finally give way. She stepped inside, immediately hit by the familiar smell of antiseptic wipes and stale chamomile tea. The apartment was small, cramped, but violently clean. Chloe dropped her keys in a ceramic bowl by the door and kicked off her squeaky shoes, groaning as the pressure released from her blistered heels. "Mom," she called out softly into the dim living room. The only light came from the muted television. Sitting in a worn floral armchair was Evelyn. She was 52, but illness had hollowed out her cheeks and turned her dark hair entirely silver. She was staring at an infomercial, her hands resting idly in her lap. "Chloe," Evelyn murmured, not looking away from the screen. "You're late. The bus?" "Yeah, Mom, the bus." Chloe walked over, pulling a thick knit blanket up to her mother's shoulders. She checked the pill organizer on the side table. Tuesday night was empty. Good. She'd remembered to take her medication. Evelyn suffered from early-onset dementia, compounded by a weak heart. Some days she was sharp, biting, the pragmatic single mother who had raised Chloe with a fierce, uncompromising love. Other days she was lost in a past Chloe didn't understand, talking to people who weren't in the room, terrified of shadows. "I made $50 in tips tonight," Chloe said, trying to inject some warmth into the quiet room. "We can get the good groceries tomorrow. Maybe some of that fresh salmon you like." Evelyn finally looked at her. Her eyes, usually clouded, suddenly sharpened. It was a terrifying clarity that always put Chloe on edge. "Did you lock the deadbolt?" "Yes, Mom, I locked it." "The chain, Chloe. Lock the chain." Evelyn's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "They come when it's quiet, when you think the shift is over." Chloe sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "Mom, no one is coming. We live on the 4th floor in the middle of nowhere. It's safe." To placate her, Chloe walked back to the door and slid the metal chain into place. As she walked toward her cramped bedroom, she paused by the small bookshelf in the hallway. On the bottom shelf sat a rusted metal cigar box. It held old photographs, a few birth certificates, and the heavy gold ring. Chloe pulled the box out and opened it. The ring sat heavy in her palm. It felt cold. She traced the jagged crack through the engraved scales. She thought of the man in the diner, the expensive coat, the dead, flat eyes, the way he had gone completely still, like a predator catching a scent. "I didn't think there were any others," he had said. Chloe wasn't stupid. She had grown up poor, which meant she had grown up observant. Men who wore tailored wool coats and had bruised knuckles didn't sit in roadside diners at 2 a.m. because they were upstanding citizens. And they certainly didn't wear custom, heavy gold rings as a fashion statement. She looked at her mother, who was back to staring blankly at the television. "Mom," Chloe asked quietly, "where did you really get this ring?" Evelyn didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, shivering in a room that wasn't cold. Chloe put the ring back in the box and closed the lid. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Tomorrow, she decided, she would take it to a pawn shop. She would sell it, melt it down, whatever. She didn't want it in the house anymore. By 4 p.m. the next day, Gabriel Costa knew exactly who Chloe Mercer was. He sat at his heavy oak desk in the study of his home, staring at the file Dean had just placed in front of him. Outside, the rain had finally broken, leaving the sky a bruised, ugly purple. "Chloe Mercer," Dean recited, standing with his hands clasped behind his back. 25. No criminal record. Dropped out of community college 3 years ago. Works 2 jobs, the diner at night and bagging groceries at a supermarket during the day. Drowning in medical debt. "The mother," Gabriel said, not looking up from a printed photograph of Chloe walking out of the diner. Her face pulled tight against the wind. "Evelyn Mercer," Dean answered. His tone shifted, growing slightly tense. "That's where it gets weird. Evelyn Mercer didn't exist before 24 years ago. No birth certificate under that name, no social security history before 2002. She just appeared in the system, rented a cheap apartment, and had a baby. Chloe." Gabriel slowly closed the file. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. 2002. The year Thomas Vance disappeared. The year Gabriel's brother was killed. "You think she was Vance's woman," Gabriel said quietly. "He put her in hiding before he skipped town." "It fits," Dean nodded. "Vance knew the heat was coming. He set her up with a new identity, gave her some cash, and left her the ring as a promise he'd come back. Only, he never did. Or, Gabriel countered, his voice chillingly calm, Vance didn't leave the ring as a promise. He gave it to her to hide. It's proof. If she has the ring, she knows what happened to him. She knows where the money went. She knows who he was working for." Gabriel stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Where is Chloe right now?" "Her shift at the supermarket ended an hour ago. She's probably heading home or taking a nap before her diner shift." Dean paused. "Gabe, what's the play here? We kicking the door of a sick woman and a waitress?" Gabriel stopped at the door. He looked back at Dean, his expression unreadable. "I don't hurt civilians, Dean. You know that. But if Evelyn Mercer knows who paid Vance to kill my brother, I'll tear that apartment apart to find it. Get the car." The diner was empty when Chloe walked in for her graveyard shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed their familiar headache-inducing hum. She tied her apron around her waist, her mind heavy. She had tried to pawn the ring that afternoon. The pawnbroker, a sketchy guy who usually took anything, had taken one look at the crest through his loop, paled, and slid it back across the counter. "I don't touch cartel markers, kid. Get that out of my shop." Cartel marker. The words echoed in her head as she filled the coffee machines. Her mother wasn't just hiding from a bad ex-boyfriend. She was hiding from ghosts with guns. The bell above the door chimed. Chloe turned, a polite greeting dying in her throat. It was him, the man from last night. Gabriel Costa walked in. He wasn't wearing the coat tonight, just a dark tailored suit, no tie. He looked less exhausted, more focused. Predatory. Chloe felt a spike of genuine fear, but she shoved it down.